Welcome back. Welcome to the Deal Doctor Livestream, 1 o'clock, Monday. Hope you all had a great Thanksgiving holiday, and welcome back to a little bit of work before we slow down a little bit for the celebrating the season, and we can still get a few things squeezed in before the end of the year. Still time, by the way, to sell a house and get it closed. I had it happen myself where I needed one more sale for the year and put it in the hopper at the end of the week, got it closed. It was a cash sale. So don't give up. There's still opportunity to get houses sold out there. But today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what happens in this time of year that we don't often think about. And sometimes it comes back to bite us. And that is inspections during the season when you can't inspect certain things, or the results of inspections may be different due to the weather. Here's an example. Did you know that radon results will skew higher when the frost line is frozen? When the frost line develops below the surface of the earth down anywhere from 3 to 6 feet deep, that it will stop radon from escaping through the natural course, which is up through the dirt and through the grass and into the atmosphere. But it will stop, and it will find a way under the frost line into a house, into the basement, sump pump cracks in the foundation, and so on, and you'll get a higher reading in that basement than you would at a time during the summer, for example. You also get a higher reading if the ground is soaked with water from rain. If the layer above the bottom of the basement is clay, you're going to get a higher reading in that environment too. So it's really important that we know what to expect when we have radon inspections done, for example, how those are going to be skewed higher and how to react to them, how to respond to them. And it may be having a second opinion, or if it's skewed really high, like 10, 12 or more, we may want to advise our sellers, hey, maybe we need to get this done before the frost line develops in there, in the ground, and forestall a problem later. We run into a similar problem with air conditioning units. Obviously, in the winter time, when the temperature drops to where it is now, for example, we can't measure the condensation capabilities of the coolant in the refrigeration system because it condenses as a result of the cold weather. So it's impossible to do inspections on AC units to measure their effectiveness when it's so cold outside. So what do we do? What do we do as buyer's agents, but also what do we do as listing agents when the AC unit can't be tested? Is it something that we want to put in escrow in a purchase agreement, for example? If we're working for a buyer, do we want to say we're going to close with this escrow agreement off to the side because we need to know that AC is working properly? Obviously in this market where we are dealing with sellers who pretty much control the show right now, making an offer that's subject to holding an escrow for the AC unit might do harm to your buyers in getting their offer accepted. On the other hand, we want to try to protect our buyers as best we can so that they don't have a surprise when the snow melts and it's time for the AC unit to kick on and it doesn't kick on. So I think there are a lot of issues that we have to look at. Same thing with sprinkler systems. Do we know when we take somebody through a house and they have a sprinkler, and the property has a sprinkler system, how are we going to determine whether or not that sprinkler system was winterized effectively? Were the pipes blown out? Were the sprinkler heads removed? How was it done to winterize that sprinkling system, or was it done at all? If it wasn't done at all and the cold weather is setting in like it is now, I can virtually guarantee that that sprinkler system is going to spring leaks everywhere in the spring. So what verification is there? Is that our duty as buyers agents to help our buyers determine what they're buying? I think it is. I think that buyers turn to us for advice on the kinds of inspections that they should do. Ultimately, it's their choice. But if we are there to help them, I think that it's really important that we know what the possibilities are with items in the house that can't be inspected effectively during the wintertime. So keep that in mind. Another thing that a lot of people don't think of is rain gutters and grading. Because the ground is frozen, you can't necessarily tell whether or not the grading flows off because, the property's frozen. So how do you determine whether or not that rainwater is flowing off and away from the house as it should be, or if it has a potential to flow against the foundation and potentially leak into the house? Same thing with rain gutters. How do we determine whether or not those rain gutters have been cleaned out prior to winter weather? Well, obviously, if an inspector gets up on a ladder, they might be able to see it. The question is, are the inspectors going to go to that extreme, or that extent, I should say, so I don't think it's extreme, but to go to that extent to verify that the rain gutters are clear and the downspouts are clear from any debris that might clog them and cause an overflow or a backup, an ice dam up under the roof during the course of the winter. So all of these things I think are really important that we talk with our buyers about to make them understand and educated about what potential problems they could have or what they want to get inspected to make sure that they don't have those problems. Vacant properties is an area that really is troubling because we ran into this a lot during the 2008 to 2012 era when we were seeing a lot of foreclosures and short sales and so on. People would abandon their houses, basically hand their keys, give up their keys to the bank, and walk away. And of course, they didn't have the money to winterize the pipes in their house and the fixtures in their house. And so as a result, fixtures cracked. You had toilets and sinks and so on that would just simply crack and be ready to leak when the water thawed out and started flowing again. Same thing with pipes. I mean, it was literally spring a leak and be flowing everywhere when the water came back on and thawed out in the spring. And people didn't know how to go about verifying that those pipes had in fact been cleared and the property had been winterized. In many cases, they hadn't. And so it was leaking within the walls, and buyers of those houses would have to go in and tear out walls, tear out and replace the piping and all of the plumbing, and they wouldn't know how to go about making sure that that property had been winterized appropriately. Here's one that we run into occasionally: landscaping. Now, I'm not a tree expert, but I can generally tell when a tree might be dead. It's a lot harder to do that in the wintertime when all of the leaves are on the ground and all of the trees are standing there looking about the same. But to take a tree down can cost $2,500. Well, if you're a buyer and you suspect, or maybe don't even know, how do you identify whether or not there's trees on the property that may be damaged or dead before you buy the property? How do you determine that? And I think it's important that we recognize that these are issues that a buyer may want to consider as they write their offer and go through the process toward closing. It's one of the dangers of waiving inspections, as you can imagine. When we don't have inspections on a property, I know that I closed one recently where at the very last minute, my buyer wanted to do a walkthrough on the property. even though we talked about that at the time we wrote the offer, and I explained that we were waiving inspections and waiving a walkthrough, and we were going to go with this very, very strong offer. At the last minute, they said, well, can't we do a walkthrough? And the listing agent made the right call and said, no, you can't. We're going to operate according to the purchase agreement, and you didn't ask for a walkthrough. And they were right. We got our offer accepted, but the buyer kind of had second thoughts. As it turned out, everything went well. We closed. They went to the house afterwards. They said everything's great. But it was a little bit nerve-wracking as we approached that moment to wonder whether or not that property was going to be in good condition when they arrived. So I think that we run into this with a lot of the process of waiving inspections and not being sure about what inspections we can do and have them give us a good indication of what that property's condition is. So what do? I mean, let's say that you have a swimming pool or a hot tub. How do you inspect those things if they've been shut down for the winter? If the pool's been covered up and the pool heater and all of the equipment, how do you know that the system has been blown out, had all the water blown out of it, so that it doesn't freeze and crack the system? That's a good question, and sometimes you can't unless you have a really good inspector who has the ability to do something that a lot of inspectors can't, which is identify whether or not a system has been blown out correctly. So it goes back to the question of, do we want to put an escrow amount in there in case in the springtime when things thaw out, we start to see some damage that's been caused because the system wasn't blown out correctly or winterized properly. It's something to consider in order to help us protect our buyers who are going in and buying those kinds of houses that may require that sort of protection. Sometimes a home warranty will help. If you have, for example, an AC unit, be sure that you check with a home warranty company if you're going to put one in place in, let's say, January, for example, that if something happens that AC unit doesn't work when April or May comes, that it will be covered by that home warranty. Make sure that you check on that before you put that in place. Let's see, in the summer, same thing with chimneys. Sometimes people don't check chimneys or have a chimney inspection, which usually is a separate inspection from the standard inspections that we have. But they don't do it because they're not thinking, well, you know, what's going to happen when this buyer starts using the chimney in November, December, January, and February. But it's important that we have those conversations with buyers to say, let's take a look at the house, not just the general inspections that we normally have, the plumbing, heating, structural, electrical, sometimes termite. We didn't, that used to be an all-the-time thing, but now it's not. But look at all of those things. Do we want to have radon inspections? Do we want to have a chimney inspection performed? You know, have a swimming pool inspection and so on. And if you do, then include that in the purchase agreement. So let me ask a question, one that I think we're going to ponder a bit. What if somebody, you're a listing agent, and I'm just going to throw this out there, what if you're a listing agent and somebody calls, a buyer agent calls and says, hey, listen, we're going to do inspections next Tuesday on the property on such and such at 1 o'clock. And the buyer is, and you say, okay, go ahead, you're going to let the person into the house. And what happens if it's the buyer's uncle, for example? It's not a licensed contractor. It's not a contractor that carries liability insurance for damage or for injury on the property. And the purchase agreements generally will say that you can choose anybody you want to be an inspector, but what happens if there's damage caused? Well, in most of the purchase agreements, it indicates that the buyer is going to make it right, is going to fix anything that's damaged if it results from the inspections. Think about that. How many buyers have an extra couple of grand in their pocket to go and fix something if something was damaged in the process? How many inspectors that are not licensed and bonded inspectors have liability insurance to cover that sort of situation? And more importantly, even with a bonded and licensed inspector, how do we know that they carry that level of insurance which will protect the property in the event something's damaged? So this is a very valid question that I think we're going to have to visit and determine what we're going to make recommendations on for the agents in protecting their sellers, but also protecting the buyers if they're going to bring in a company, whether it's licensed and bonded or somebody who's not. So do we have any questions, Don, at this point? Okay. I think that kind of covers what I wanted to cover today. And rather than go on with other stuff, I think we'll end it there. And if you have questions, please post them, and we'll answer them as the day goes on. Again, thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week.